COVID claimed the lives of 36 residents of the LaSalle Veterans Home last fall.
Over the coronavirus outbreak at an Illinois veterans.
And the family of a war veteran named Richard Seski wants justice
tonight. State officials
say
nearly 200 residents and staff members have tested positive.
A lack of planning, training, and poor communication.
It's never acceptable when we see rampant infections.
When 35 people die, there's something systematically wrong.
This was not March. This was not April, when we didn't have testing, when we didn't understand the epidemiology of this disease, its infectiousness, when we had a shortage of N95.
Right after high school, he joined the Air Force. And I mean, we're talking like a month after. He literally flew around the world delivering supplies to soldiers in whatever country they happened to be. So he was very proud that he went around the world. When he got out of the service, he married my mother like a year or two later, and then worked for my grandfather in a loan and financing business. Even till the very last visit I had with him, he was very sharp with numbers and business ways. His mind kept going. He was not like sitting there looking into space or anything. He was still a very sharp man, academically and financially. The time at the Veterans Home was good for him up until COVID hit. He was like everybody else, just locked in there. No one could visit him, even at the window, for a long time. Being my father, he made friends with everybody. You'd go visit him, he knew everybody up and down the hallway. Oh, we're playing cards. There was my dad playing cards. Oh, we're making poppies, making $2 an hour or something, doing that. Just whatever there was to do, he would do. Always involved. When COVID hit, it was like everyone closed their, I see no evil, I hear no evil, they didn't know what was going on. I don't remember anything other than a phone call if he fell out of his wheelchair or something, they would call and say, your father slipped out of his wheelchair today. He's not hurt. There's no bruises, nothing. We just want to let you know. Those types of things were reported. Anything about COVID, nothing was reported, other than we would maybe get an email saying no visitors are allowed. You could only use phone calls, and then eventually you could visit at the window. You have to have a mask on. But again, updates of the number of people who were diagnosed with COVID, we didn't get much of anything that I remember. I visited him on November 11th of last year. It was Veterans Day, so I drove my 100 miles to LaSalle and 100 miles back. But we had a great visit. It was a wonderful last visit at the window. We were laughing and joking, and things were fine, and he was. Now, Dave, don't forget, I have an insurance payment due, but he just knew everything. Dad, I've taken care of it. Don't worry. But he kept up on all of this. His mind was very sharp. But here was a man who was very sociable, who was very active, and he was locked in his room. He wasn't allowed out of the room. So someone had to bring COVID into the room. It didn't jump through the window, you know what I mean? So, I says, well, Dad, I got to get home. I'd like to go to the gym before it gets too late. He goes, oh, you don't go to the gym. You keep saying it. And I did some jumping jacks for him at the window, and he was laughing. It was good. So that was on a Wednesday. So on Friday, I get a phone call from the Veterans Home. Your dad has COVID. Oh my God, okay. He was just fine, Wednesday, and this is Friday. And they go, no, he tested positive, and we can see he's quickly falling, And I said, well, should I come down? And they said, no, you can't come in to visit him anyway. We'll keep you abreast of what's going on. So they called again on Sunday and said he was really going down very quickly. And they were thinking of sending him to a hospital to be put on a respirator. And I said, well, what would that do? Would that help him at all? And they go, no, it wouldn't help him at all. It would just give him another day or two to be alive. And we can't send him to Illinois Valley Community Hospital because they're filled. We'd have to send him to the Princeton Hospital. And I'm thinking my dad's going to wake up and he's going to be in a strange hospital in a different town. He won't know what's going on. We can't go in to visit him. You know, this would be traumatic. So I said, no, don't send him to the hospital. So they said, we will take good care of him. Well, that was on Sunday. On Monday afternoon, they called me and they said, if you want a compassion visit, come down. So I drove down. I brought my niece, who's a nurse up here at Northwestern. She went with me. And we went to visit him that night. And I did get to spend a half an hour with him. They put me in the whole safety suit. But the woman who was in the nurse who was in the COVID ward walked out of the COVID ward through the entire veterans home in her protective outing to the lobby to greet us. You know, I mean, this is crazy. And of course, at the time, I'm upset and, you know, I'm not thinking properly. And so she goes, well, you have to get dressed too to go in. So I got all dressed up in that. We went in. He's passed out like this, sitting up in a chair. But I did talk to him. It was a very good visit. I had it was a good closure for me. How it was for him, I don't know, because he could not respond in any way. I said, okay, I'm ready to go now. And she goes, okay, come with me. So there I am walking with her, both of us, in contaminated clothes through the entire veterans home to sit me down in the lobby in my contaminated clothes while my niece gets dressed up to go into visit her grandpa, okay? And I'm sitting in the lobby in these contaminated clothes talking to the security guard. And I mean, again, I was not thinking properly. Afterwards, I thought, what in God's name was I walking around in contaminated clothes for? Yeah, and sitting in the lobby. Someone is going to come and sit in that chair tomorrow or whatever, and whatever. So then after my niece's visit, both of us took off our clothes in the lobby, not anywhere else, but in the lobby, and then threw them in a wastebasket in the lobby, okay? A couple hours later, they called me up and said he had passed away. I posted some pictures of him on Veterans Day on the 11th last week, and you know, got many comments. He was such a good man. I miss your dad. He was always so much fun. He was always thoughtful, you know, comments like that. And he was. Unfortunately, because of COVID and basically mistreatment at the veterans home, he died before he should have died. Yes, he was 95 years old, but he still had years ahead of him, you know? You know, you can tell I'm still emotional over it. He was an inspiration to me. Like I said before, he played a big role in my life. He was, he supported. He supported me in whatever I wanted to do. And I've done some crazy things over my lifetime, but he was always there, you know. My dad was an influence. He was a person I admired. I admired him losing her husband of 40 some years and not being able to say goodbye to him. That's the hardest part, I think. If she could have done something other than see him in the casket. I'm guessing, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm guessing her dementia maybe progressed a little more quickly because of this loss. I think if she could still just talk to him over the phone, and they did talk to each other every single night on the phone, every single night, while she was in the nursing home and he was in the veterans home. So they kept that contact with each other. And when he was gone, after he was gone, she went down. The nurses' aides used to go in and do puzzles with my dad because it gave him something to do. So there was a 500-piece puzzle, and they would all sit around him, maybe not, with masks on. How can you have an administration that allows people to run a veterans home with such lax security and scrutiny over what's happening? The whole thing could have been preventable. Someone needs to be responsible for what wasn't done and what was done. And the two never really connected, or what was supposed to be done. Somebody should have known. I would just say thank you for all you did for me and for so many other people. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I could say, I think.
Dad, Richard Seske Sr., grew up in Lyons, Brookfield area. He quit school at 8th grade. And at the age of 13, he was told to go to work to help support the family because they had so many children and the dad had passed. He was not only the patriarch of our family, he was the patriarch of his own family. And everyone looked up to him for help and support in any way that he could give, which was all the time because Dad was a very, very giving person. During the war, he was an operating engineer and he built the roads in Korea. He was stationed in Waco, Texas. And then after his discharge, he went to work for Saltwich Plumbing and then started his own business. He made tons of friends at the veterans home. He was the life of the party. He loved going to coffee and conversation, where they would do that daily. They would have coffee and pick a topic to talk about. And then he attended church weekly and received communion. He loved playing bingo because he usually won. And bowling. He told us he was bowling and we thought he was cuckoo, but he was really bowling with a beach ball. And so he was always involved in the activities that they had going on. Before COVID, Mom would go every single day. She would leave the house at 9, get there at 9:30, and she would be home at 3. That was every day she did that, even on the weekends.
Rain or shine.
Rain or shine. And then COVID hit. She was sitting with my dad in the lunchroom. She would sit at the table with all the 6 guys at the table and do their menus and cut their meat.
And put their bibs on and get them ready for like their coffees or their drinks ready, make sure they were all set at the table. And she would do that every day, like Mom said. And then when March 5th,
she was told to go home.
Yep. That was the last time she was able to see him, up close and personal and be able to touch him.
All 6 men, all 6 veterans that sat at the table with Dad for lunch and breakfast and dinner are all gone. They all died within a week of each other. And they didn't have a lot of family to come and visit them, so they were grateful for Mom's company every day. Because Mom was like, we were like their family when we would go to the veterans home for activities when they had special occasions. We would take the veterans that didn't have family and they would come and sit with us. So, because we were always there for Dad. So the guys that didn't have anybody would come and sit at our table and they were part of our family. And then when COVID hit, Dad got really withdrawn and depressed. And he would tell mom, we would FaceTime with him every day. The CNA would FaceTime us on her own phone. And we got to visit with dad, and he would say, why did you throw me out like garbage? Why isn't anybody here to see me? Not understanding about the virus. So he would say that he's lonely and he's sad. He just wanted some affection. We had to always see him through the window. So there was no physical interaction with COVID. We had to be through the window.
And then, of course, you know, he didn't understand why we were standing outside and why he couldn't hear us or really hear us or see us, because there was a glare on the window, and why we were outside. In the beginning of November, we received a call from this individual that would, you know, take very close care of my grandpa, and said, you know, I noticed there just isn't something right. I really think that you need to call his nurse and follow up, because he's just not himself. He was slurring his words. He wasn't, you know, making sense. She asked for an update on the morning of Wednesday, November 4th, and she didn't hear back. So she had called back again. Again, the nurse was going to call her back. She still didn't hear back from her. So on the 5th, the next day, she talked with the nurse finally, and they said that he was okay. They didn't see anything wrong with him. And we were able to FaceTime with him later on in the afternoon. And to mom, it seemed like he had a stroke. He wasn't speaking correctly. He was slurring his words. He just wasn't really there. There was a lot going on. You could tell that there was something wrong. So then mom called Spring Valley, which is the hospital that's associated to the VA, and talked with the she was an physician's assistant, and said, there is something wrong with my father. I need a doctor to go see him. The nurses are telling me that he's fine, and I can blatantly tell that he is not. And she happened to be there that day. And she called back and said that she did believe that there was something going on, that he was having a hard time breathing, and that she was going to have an order for morphine in his file if he would need it. She didn't think that he would need it at this time, but she felt like if things escalated, that she wanted to make sure that he had that so he would be comfortable. My grandpa also did suffer from asthma, which is something my mother has as well. And when he would, that was another reason why she wanted for him to have morphine, because it would help him breathe if, he started to kind of go down more. Then later on that day is when we received a call saying that he had tested positive for COVID. So that all happened within that day. So it was all very quick in how kind of everything progressed. He was moved to a different room. He was already confused as it was. He was sick, and now he's in a different room, different nurses who have obviously full on PPE. So he didn't understand what was happening. He had a different roommate. So it just added on to all of the confusion, and didn't help him trying to understand what was going on. About 5 or 6 days after he was diagnosed, they had said that we needed to come and say goodbye, basically, that things weren't going to get any better. And nothing they were doing was helping, and his breathing was getting worse. So we needed to come and probably say our goodbyes. And unfortunately, we weren't able to see him. We had to do it from outside a window. So my mom, myself, my grandmother, his wife, Bernadine, my mom's sister, Deborah, and her oldest, Lacey, and Lacey's few-month-old daughter, Elin. We all went. Mom brought Windex to clean the window so we could see him. And to our surprise, he was sitting up talking to us.
We made a big poster.
Yep, Mom made a big poster, put all of our names on it to have it outside his window. He was sitting up talking to us. He gave us kind of that hope. You know, we left there kind of very optimistic.
He's gonna beat this. He's
Yeah.
gonna be there tomorrow.
So the following day, my mom's brother, Richard Jr., and his family went to go see him. And again, they basically said the same thing we said. You know, he's gonna get through this. He's gonna be great. You know, he looks great. He was up talking. And then by 7 p.m., Mom received a call that he couldn't breathe and he was struggling to breathe. And she couldn't talk, so I had to take the phone from her. And I was talking to the nurse and I said, well, where's his morphine? The nurse we talked to a few days ago, the doctor we talked to a few days ago, prescribed him morphine and it's in his file, and she had no record of it. And I'm like, well, how can that be? She told me she was going to put it in there for if it got to this point, he's struggling to breathe. He needs this morphine. He has asthma. He, you know, now he has COVID. He needs some sort of comfort. We called back about a half hour later, and apparently the whole entire VA was out of morphine. There was no morphine in the entire VA. They had to order it. Come to find out, they order it from the Twin Cities,
Davenport,
Iowa. So by this time it's 7:30 on a Saturday night. They were waiting for the shipment to come from Iowa. It was probably 60-mile-an-hour winds that night. The rain was sideways. It was freezing cold. Grandpa didn't receive the morphine until 12:30 the following morning. So from 7 p.m. until 12:30 a.m., he suffered to breathe because they did not have the proper medication during a pandemic for him to breathe after it was prescribed to him days before. Then got a call a little bit before 4 a.m. That he had passed away. So after he had gotten the morphine, around 12:30, he was finally able to rest and pass away. And during that time, he was alone. He had the nurses with him, but none of the family. So the social butterfly loving man was all alone. So Bernadine's lost. She lost her purpose. Her purpose every day was to go there and take care of him. She always took care of him. And she has since rapidly declined herself, because she just sits in her chair now and kind of stares into space. She's obviously still very much with it. And we're very lucky for that, but she's kind of lost her reason to live. That was her best friend.
For me, I'm lost. I don't have my dad anymore. And it's very hurtful. And it's even harder to know that he didn't have that morphine to comfort him, since he didn't have physical contact to comfort him.
I'm his second to oldest grandchild, because I chose a life of work. I'm not married and I don't have kids. And when I do, he's not going to be there.
He'll be here. He's always right here on our shoulder.
But I know that he got to meet his great-grandchildren, and I know that he loved his grandchildren that he has. And it just breaks my heart that my children one day won't know him and won't have the memories that we do. And that's really hard. And it was taken from us. And I understand that obviously it's a pandemic and, things happen, but it didn't have to happen. And that's what is so frustrating, is that we gave them we gave them our trust to take care of him and to take care of them, because we needed them too. And these men served our country and protected us and probably experienced things that we could never understand. And they weren't treated correctly. They weren't given the same type of respect that they gave us. And it's not fair. And to be left alone to die is even worse. I don't even know if it would be a conversation. I would just want to hug. I would just want to hug him and to tell him I love him and to thank him, because he was my only grandfather. He was, besides my father, the other father figure that I had in my life. And seeing how much my mother loved him and looked up to him, and how much she would glow when she would see him, meant everything. And just to tell him I love him and thank you for everything, for the memories, for his love, for the life that he gave all of us. But I think a hug would be the biggest thing. That's all I would ever want, is just a hug.
Well, what I would say is I would reinforce the fact that I love him very much and try to explain to him about this virus, because it was way over his head. He did not understand a word about this virus. And just to let him know what a great job he did, because I'm a good person and it's because of him that I'm grateful for his parenting and then my childhood, because I had a great childhood. So I would let him know that he did a good job and that I was proud to be his daughter.
I'll start with his military career, because his whole life was wrapped around military career, which was not really a career, but when he got drafted, he was in high school and he got drafted, and he always says that his Uncle Sam called his name and he had to go. But he waited till he was drafted. And he went over as a medic. He studied in Colorado at Fitzsimmons to be a medic. And then he went over to the European theater. DJ +2, he hit Omaha Beach. And then he followed Patton's army all the way through to the Battle of the Bulge and through to the end of the war. I took him back with my two daughters for the 60th anniversary, and we did his whole march, so to speak, starting in England, across the channel, over to Omaha, and let him see where he had been. And it was very obviously emotional for both of us, all of us. He wore his World War II hat over there, and all of the French would stop and thank him 60 years later. So he was shaped by the war for the rest of his life. So, and he lived it, he survived it. He had some stories. I was able to get a lot of stories out of him. I gathered all of his data and all of his paperwork, and I still have it all together for him. So it was learning for all of us, and it was something that we can remember him by because it was special. So after the war, came home, got married about 4 years later to my mom, had 3 kids. I was the youngest. I'm still the youngest, I guess. And he started working at Libion's Ford, which made windshields for GM cars. And he spent his 40 plus years there till he retired. When he was about 90, he had emergency surgery for cancer. Actually, he had most of his colon and his intestines removed, and he survived. And I mean, the guy was stubborn. He was healthy. He kept himself healthy. He went to the Y in Peru almost every other day to walk in the pool. So he was very conscientious of his health. He had plenty of family and friends around. He spent most of his days at the Legion. He would go every Sunday. So he lived alone until he was 94, until we moved him to the VA. He had decided, it was his decision, that it was time. I think he started falling and wouldn't tell anybody. And I think he realized he needed a little help in that department. His mind was always with him. He would remember things that I could never remember, that I would never want to remember. He was the town historian, in the fact that people could ask him, you know, what was on this corner, or who owned this, and where was this for the last, 90 some years. He would have the answer. So he participated in all the activities. He had his friends. He would get the newspaper every day. It was important to him to read the paper and know what was going on. He usually knew. I'd ping him when I'd see stuff on Facebook, and he'd say, "Oh, I already know." So he was in touch, because I was just trying to keep him aligned with all of his friends and what was going on out there, but he already knew. He did great up until the first COVID hit, and they were still locked down in March, but they actually did very well. He was quite content because he could still get around. He couldn't go out, he couldn't do anything, but he could still get around. And I used to tell him it was the safest place for you. Little did I know. And I would tell him that as soon as it was over, I'd be home to take him out and do what he wanted to do, go to lunch, drive around, take a few days, whatever he wanted to do. And he would just look at me like he knew that would happen, which his intuition was pretty crazy. So, but I still kept telling him I'd be home. So they made it through the first bout of COVID very well. The last time I saw him was in April through the window. We talked to him. My brother was there. I'd call him every Sunday. I always did. And he'd always call me when he could. And then when COVID started, it started getting confusing. When he got through the summer, he got to go outside, so he was happier. When it really started hitting in October, and I kept getting all the emails that said how many were positive, how many were passing away. It got really hard every day to read those. And I'd call him, see how he was doing more often, and he was still fine. He said his roommate, they left his roommate in his room for a while, and he said, he finally went out and told them that he was not doing well, and they moved him. And then when my dad tested positive and all of the movement started, he got really confused. And when they were had to stay in the rooms, it was really hard, because then he had nothing, right? He was totally dependent on them, didn't know what was going on. They'd move him around. He didn't have his things. He lived with his phone, and when they'd move him, they'd lose the charger. So I couldn't get him. He couldn't call me. I'd have to call the nurses station. The nurses stations were chaotic. I'd ask them to go check on him, and they said, "Your daughter's checking on you," and walk away. I mean, there was nothing I was losing contact with him. So I kept trying, and eventually we'd connect. Eventually I'd send somebody in to find his charger, and some people would respond, but they were so understaffed. It was just sad. Once they finally locked down, I think a lot of wives came in every day prior to COVID and helped take care of their husbands. And then they had a lot of temporary support and volunteers. And once they locked down, they lost all that extra support and those extra hands. And I think the people that were still working were so overwhelmed with trying to manage it all that they didn't bring in more help, from what I understand. And the people that Dad was familiar with were no longer there. They had left, so it made it very confusing and very hard for him. His health was always great. I always said he was one of the healthiest old guys in there, until he wasn't. He actually tested negative for COVID and they moved him out of the ward. Don't know where they moved him, didn't know where it was. No one could tell me what room he was in, where he was at, what was going on. And I talked to him one day. The last day I saw him on a web was FaceTime when they were doing the web, was November 17th. And I have a picture of him with his thumbs up that he's doing great. And then I talked to, they took him out to the doctor for his shoulder and his arm. And the doctor said he was doing great. He was feisty, he was happy, he was laughing, he was great. He was surprised at how well a 95-year-old was doing at the time. And then when he got back from that doctor, and the doctors always call me and talk to me about it all, and they sent him back. And then Dad said, no, the doctor didn't even touch him. So I wasn't sure why they moved him, why they actually took him to the hospital to see the doctor when he could have just talked to him. That Sunday, on the 6th, I get the call that he's in respiratory failure. And then when he got to the hospital, they said he had pneumonia, he was dehydrated, and he basically had a UTI. So he had not been seen, or no one had acknowledged or didn't even know he was sick until he was that far along. And then I was going to drive home that night, and they said to wait. And I ended up going the next morning, but he had already passed alone. Well, he had enough people around him there from the hospital, but not family. When he did pass, the first thing my daughter and we still say it, is it shouldn't have happened. He should not have died, right? There was no reason for him to die had they taken care of him. He tried to get help. I tried to get him help, and no one would listen. Since then, it's been hard. I'm angry. The fact that I didn't even know he was sick. I was just, one day he's fine and the next day he's gone. And why did they not communicate that with me? Why did they not call me? Why did I get that critical call that said he's in respiratory failure and he doesn't want help? And I said, take him to the hospital. The main thing is, I don't want this to happen again to anybody. It shouldn't have happened to him, and it did. I'd always said he's going to live to be 100. And he would just laugh at me. And I said, no, you're going to do it just to piss me off because you just want me to keep coming back here and keeping it together. And he would have. And I think that I put my trust into the VA. And I think I had false trust after the first go round of COVID. I feel bad that I continually told him it was going to be okay and he was in the best place ever. I feel like I should have done something else. Don't know what it was, but hindsight's 2020. I know when I had to go pick up his things, I had to call them to schedule a time. I mean, no one reached out to me after it happened from the VA. I only heard from the hospital, which really bothered me as well. And then when I went there to pick up his stuff, they just acted like it was no big deal. You know, here it is, go. So it was kind of discouraging there. Still sad that he's gone. It was a huge change. Even though I was so far away, I talked to him every day. And I had taken care of him for 20 years. And I felt like in the end, I wasn't able to take care of him. And then I questioned whether I could push harder to the nurses and to the staff. I was always grateful they did what they did because I knew how overwhelmed they were. But in the long run, they still didn't get their job done. He was always there. He was always I would say that I love him, and then I'm sorry that I couldn't be there for him in the end.
My dad was born June 14th, 1938, and he was the oldest of a total of 4 boys. He grew up in Chicago, went to Gage Park High School, and after high school, he joined the Marines. He wanted to serve our country. And after he got out of the service, he met my mom. They got engaged and they got married, and they were married on August 29th, 1959. They were married for 61 years. And they had 3 kids, myself, my sister Deborah, and my brother Tom. And we had a really great childhood growing up. My dad was always there for us. He taught us how to ride our bike without training wheels, took us fishing, went to baseball games, went camping, went on family vacations. Everything was really great. So somebody told us about LaSalle Veteran Home. So we put my dad on a list for over there, and they finally called us, and my dad got in October 17th, 2017 at the LaSalle Veteran Home. My dad was never going to walk, talk, or eat again. We understood that. He understood that. We explained everything to him, even though he had a massive stroke. My father understood completely. He understood his surroundings. He understood exactly what was going on. When the doctors would come in the room, whenever he had to go to the hospital or go for doctor visits, he would pay attention. He knew exactly what they were saying. He just could not verbalize back. And then COVID struck. March of 2020. I was on my way to go see my dad. I would always pick up my mom. In the beginning, when my dad first got there, we would go 4 times a week. Once on the weekend I would go, and I would pick up my mom all 4 times, and we would always go. After a 4-hour commute one way, it began to take a total, complete toll on me. So then we cut it down to 3 days a week. He seemed happier on that side too, and even though he didn't verbalize, he would still make eye contact with the other veterans. And there was one veteran in particular. His name was Butch. And we were wheeling my dad in his wheelchair down the hall, and he stopped us. And he looked at my dad and said hi, and he went to go shake my dad's hand. He said, "I'm your dad's friend." He said, "I look out for him." It just touched me, it really did. That somebody was looking out for my dad when we're not there. No. So that's how I knew he recognized the people over there, It was really, really something. But like I started to say before, COVID hit in March of 2020. My mom and I was going to pick up my mom. I get a phone call, and it was Angela saying that they were going to terminate visiting hours because COVID struck there. And I said, "Oh God, no." I said, "How is my dad?" At that time, when she called me, she said, "Your dad is fine." And that was in March, and everything was okay. They started to allow where you could visit outside by the window. We did that a few times. Then they allowed where you could actually have the partition. November 3rd was a phone call from the nurse, Kyla. And she said, "Sandy, your father tested positive for COVID." My mouth dropped. I said, "How could this be?" I said, back when the VA discussed what their protocols were in place for COVID, they told us that that wing was going to be safe. We questioned them that's on there. What about your ventilation system? That germ could carry throughout. Oh no, everything is safe. We have everything is, we have high pressurized rooms. They were going to use the one side where it was for COVID patients, or if somebody came back from the hospital, they had to go on a different side of the wing, and everything was going to be safe. And it wasn't safe at all. It was a roller coaster of events until the day that he died. Nobody could ever imagine the hell that my dad's family went through, let alone what my dad went through. We could not be there with him. There was nobody there to sit there and hold his hand. It was just horrible, horrible. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I would wake up in the morning crying that I couldn't even be by my dad. It was heartbreaking to hear my mom cry on the phone constantly about it. You know, what do? We can't be there. She said, I can't even be there. I can't hold him. I can't hug him. I cannot tell him I love him to his face. Nobody should ever have to go through that. Nobody should. When I read that report, I was livid. How careless could they have been with everybody's lives? How careless. Oh, and then Angela tells us on the phone, but we kept COVID out for so long. You didn't do a good job, Angela. It got in there. Look how many men it killed. 36 men. How good did you do? That report, I was furious about that report, what I was reading. That proper hand sanitizer, the ventilation, what do they do? How do you take people and you put sick people in a wing where there's other healthy people? That was our biggest concern. What do you do then? How are you going to stop that from spreading down the hall? Then we find out they had nothing set up. It was a tragedy that never should have happened. And I don't want to hear somebody sit there and say, well, your dad was 79 years old. I don't want to hear that. That was my dad. His age had nothing to do with it. He could have lived another 10 years. Their negligence did this to him. If he survived a stroke for 3.5 years, COVID took him out, not his stroke. It's just very upsetting. It's very, very hard. My dad was her life. You know, my mom was 17 when she got married, and my dad was 21. They were together for 61 years, you know, raised 3 kids. My dad was the rock in our family. He was always there for my mom, you know, and she's having a hard time with him not being there. Just the simplest little things, you know, going out to eat, taking her to the store, you know, doing different things. He's not there for her, you know, and she's overwhelmed with it all. We're not my dad. You know, we can't replace what she's lost. Nobody could replace what she's lost. You know, nobody can. You know, just very, very hard. To see your mom cry, to hear her cry on the phone, to see her cry in person, it's hard. And then it's coming up on a year, December 19th, that my dad passed away. There's an empty chair. There's an empty spot in our hearts now that will never be filled. Nothing you can do or say is going to bring my dad back. It's empty. It's an empty spot in your heart. Christmas coming up, same thing. We can't go up there and bring him gifts. You know, we would bring a Christmas tree up every year, you know, for his room. We all brought him his gifts, and, you know, you try to make the best out of life that you can, you know, when somebody's in a facility. But they took that from us. They robbed us of that. My first thing would be is, I miss you. And Dad, I love you with all my heart and soul. And if I could change anything, I would. I just wish, Dad, we could have been there for you. Someone to hold your hand. And I tell my dad every night, I said, you know, Dad, the only consolation that makes me feel somewhat better is knowing that you're now with your son. My dad lost his only son when my brother was 17 years old. And it was my dad who kept us all strong when my brother was sick and died. But now my dad's with my brother. And that's my only consolation. is knowing that he's with him again. But what's hard for everybody else is he's not here. You know, I just want to hear his voice again. I want to hear him one last time say, you know, Sandy, I love you. I miss you. No one should have to die alone. Your family should always be there by your side. I want to make sure that this does not ever happen to anybody else again. No family should have to go through this. You know, they could have done something else. Why would you bring somebody who is sick, diagnosed with COVID, back into a facility where everybody over there has health issues? Why would you do this? It made no sense to us. Something should have been done. And that was our biggest fear, was it was going to spread in there. Our biggest fear came true. I should say our nightmare came true. And then the day that he died, we weren't expecting it. We were not expecting it at all. You know, and they call up, oh, your father passed away. We're sorry about that. And that was it. That was it. Then the doctor calls you a few days later to ask you how you're doing. How do you think we're doing? How do you think we're doing?